Was there really a riot at the right? That's what this video is all about. It's in response to some of the comments we got on our Rite of Spring video. And I'm going to read out a few of these. One is from Alucard, who said, "There was no riot. This video repeats the infamous legends that surrounded the first public concert of the piece. Most are inaccurate. Many of the composers quoted in this video, such as Saint-Saëns, were never there. Most of the reviews at the time claim that the core issue was the dancing." Val says the debut riot occurred not because of Stravinsky's music, but because of the oddball choreography. NJ Lawrence says the riot was staged. Diane Jenkins says, "I think the problem was actually the mixed audience." What we're going to do is address some of these responses in this video. What we present is the orthodox, traditional viewpoint that on that night of the 29th of May 1913, there was a riot at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées when Diaghilev's ballet The Rite of Spring was premiered. To quote Stravinsky himself, the curtain opened on a group of knock-kneed and long-braided lolitas. They were jumping up and down and the storm broke. 50 years later, one of the dancers, a lady called Lydia Sokolova, her name was not really so exotic as that, it was Hilda Munnings in fact, she recalled the audience raring for a fight, and they weren't even letting the conductor, they weren't even letting the music play. The conductor, the moment he got on the podium, was sort of shouted at and there was a huge uproar. Everyone was readying themselves for a fight. So we've been left with reports of fist fights, of catcalling, of fruit being pelted at the performers, of someone even being challenged to a duel in the audience. Apparently, dozens of people were arrested by the police. Now, each one of these incidents is recounted in our video, but what I'd say is pretty remarkable is for such a well-known event of international historical renown, barely on any of those incidents can be verified. In fact, the idea that there was a riot, to use that word at all, arguably only crystallised a few decades after the event. We don't really find the word used in contemporary newspaper reports. So, was this all a PR stunt by Diaghilev? Was Saint-Saëns really at the premiere? Or was he in fact at a later performance of the concert version of the piece when he made that baboon comment, if he made it at all? Was it Ravel, Debussy, or both of them who were cheering on Stravinsky at the premiere? Or was it the second ballet performance, if they did at all? Well, what we can say is the audience were geared up for what they believed would be a really outrageously modern spectacle, because the year before they had heard Debussy's Prélude de l'après-midi du faune, also presented by Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, and the exoticism of it, the eroticism, this surreal, archaic fantasy of the piece raised more than a few eyebrows amongst the Parisian aristocracy. But the right was arguably different. It was loud, it was vulgar, it was showing a primitive society of people who danced to celebrate their relationship with the earth, not what the Parisian aristocrats were expecting, pretty tutus and swan lake. This leads us to suspect that part of the problem may have been Nijinsky's choreography, as some of our commenters have talked about. Apparently, when the concert version of the Rite was presented a year later, that's just the music, Stravinsky was apparently carried on the shoulders of his loving admirers out of the concert hall, an emperor of the avant-garde. As our commenters have pointed out, Nijinsky's choreography was really grating. It pulled dancers down to the ground. We looked at this in the video. It's the opposite of graceful ballerinas floating through the air, defying gravity, to use a phrase from Wicked. And what about these costumes, Roris costumes? They covered his ballerinas from head to toe. There was no skin showing. Yes, it was primal, but not very sexy. And we know that Parisian fashionistas, up to this day, they want sexy. So we've got unconventional dancing, we've got unconventional costumes, but could those factors have caused a riot? Really? Well, one of our commenters, Diane, said that it was all about the mix of the audience. It was that which caused the riot. And she may be onto something there. This does chime with contemporary accounts of class warfare amongst the audience. And we looked a little bit at this in our video. Stravinsky's great friend, the poet Jean Cocteau, he talked about the aesthetic crowd of avant-gardists. They were in the stalls. They would applaud anything that was novel and new, just to annoy and to show their contempt for the people up in the boxes. So what we can conclude is this, that the workings of myth and legend all play their part in informing our understanding of great works of art. And that understanding evolves over time until the great work of art forms a whole new life and meaning of its own. And what better piece to fan the flames of our fans than The Rite of Spring, which is essentially a ballet all about myth and legend itself.